Hey, my name is Kenny, and today on Tech Talk with RHT Services, we are talking about the FAA outage that occurred this past Wednesday, which was January the 11th. Now, if you're not aware of it, basically what happened was some contractors, they don't say who the contractors work for, made a change to the one of the FAA systems, the NOTAM system or NOTAM. I've seen two pronunciations of it. System actually tracks where there are issues on a given particular flight path, and so this information is then stored into a database, and then as planes navigate, that information is then brought up and shared with the pilots and the air traffic controllers who are managing the flights where that issue may exist. Now, for what I can gather based off of this article and a couple of other articles that I kind of glanced at, is that the change was made by a contractor. The fact that it's a contractor doesn't make a difference. However, in some of the articles, they emphasize, oh, it's a contractor and not necessarily a government employee. The change was made by a person to this particular database, as it says right here. So the preliminary work was traced to the outage being a damaged database file, and there's no evidence of a cyber attack, which is good news. But based off of this, though, it's a 30-year-old system. It's highly unlikely that somebody's trying to hack that, but I could be wrong. Now, as I kind of mentioned earlier, so the system failed was the central database for NOTAMs, Notice to Air Missions, which is a nationwide space system in the United States. This system advises pilots of issues along their route and at their destination. It has a backup, which officials switch to when the problems with the main system emerge, according to the source. Now, the problem was that the change was made in the production system, and as it notes here, the corrupt file was also found in the backup system. This is a major flaw in the way they implemented IT. And the reason I say this is because of the fact, so having previously worked in operations, one of the things that we had to do was we were to make the change in production. And then once the change was confirmed, then it could be made in the other secondary instances. Now, here's something that I'm not sure of how they have it set up, but normally what you do is you do your change in a test or user acceptance environment. And when I worked in operations, this was something like we had to do, and we had to prove that we had done it by screenshots and documenting the steps and a bunch of other things. I'm not sure if they have a secondary or testing environment that they could have done in, given that the system is 30 years old. But I could be wrong. Now, normally when you test it in that environment, you confirm that the steps are correct, then you are able to go into the production environment and replicate those same steps, and you should have, in theory, the same outcome. One big thing that I saw with this, though, is that they made a change to a file in the production environment in the primary instance, and I'm assuming, but I could be wrong, that that change was also made in the backup or secondary instance. When you're making production changes, and if you work in operations or DevOps, you will know this, you always make the change in one environment. You do the necessary confirmations to make sure that that environment will come back up after you've made that change. And then, only then have you done those things, do you then go into the secondary or backup instance and then repeat that change in that particular environment. This would help prevent outages like what has taken place here with the FAA. And it doesn't seem as though that they did this. Now, one thing that I learned from my years in operations, we had some issues. We've had in the 7 years that I worked in operations and automated testing, we had our lower level support teams actually cause production issues. In some cases, those issues were minor and could easily be recovered. In some cases, those issues were significant to the point that the person got written up. Because of the significant issues, they instituted what was called a maker checker system or process. Now, that maker checker process is one person gets assigned to make whatever change, update, implementation, whatever the case, and they do that. then the checker would be the person that verifies using their own computer and logging in with their own credentials that the change that the maker had done was done correctly and accurately. Only at that point would then the next step in the process would then be allowed to be completed. So one person would do it, the other person would verify that it was done, continue on until you got through all of these steps for the implementation or change. I feel like a procedure or process similar to that would have mitigated this type of issue. I would also mention that changing one instance at a time instead of doing both would have also helped prevent this type of issue. Now, one thing that I have done, even when I worked in operations, and in some cases I still do now, is that I make a backup of whatever file it is and store it in a completely different location. That way, if I so happen to modify something that I shouldn't, or something gets corrupted, I can go to that other location and bring that file back here, making a copy, still leaving the backup over there, but making a copy and then confirming everything's working, then go back through that steps again. There's a lot that they can learn from this, and I say this because of the fact government does have a tendency to run behind in the latest and greatest of implementation and IT practices. Part of that is because of the fact government is slow to adopt new technologies. I saw in another article that mentions that this particular NOTAM or NOTUM system is 30 years, if not older, which in my opinion, given that it is government, is not surprising. A lot of these systems are pretty much legacy type of systems where they're so old that you would literally have to rewrite them with new technology. But the problem is most people don't necessarily understand the existing technology, so you end up having to create these workarounds or doing shadow IT to get what you need out of these particular systems, or to get them to do what you need them to do. That being said, hopefully this has provided some insight on some operations and DevOps procedures that could theoretically be implemented and improved upon in the future as it relates to this. And hopefully you have learned something as it relates to DevOps and operations that you can apply if you are in one of those type of positions. Comments and questions, drop those down below. I'd be love to hear suggestions from those of you that have or currently do work in DevOps and operations, and your opinions about this particular matter. Please be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up, and we'll see you in the next one.